Pat, would you line up our big position battles entering August and your top to bottom assessment of how those shape up?
Yeah, I think quarterback obviously is at the top of the list. While I do think Will Howard is A, the favorite coming out of spring, and B, the most likely guy to win the job. As I said earlier, I think Devin Brown's still in that mix. Um, I think if Devin Brown doesn't get hurt in the Cotton Bowl, we're talking about this is Devin Brown's team, and maybe Ohio State doesn't even go out into the transfer portal to look for Will Howard. I've said this before. I think it's unfair to label Devin Brown as an injury-prone guy. We talked to him before spring practice, and he talked about how he never missed a game because of an injury before last season. He'd been a healthy player. He hurts his thumb, I believe it was, before the spring game, so fans don't get to see him there. He then gets hurt in, I think it was the Purdue game, again in the Cotton Bowl. And I think it's more just it's been really bad series of injuries at the wrong times for Devin Brown. Really bad just in terms of when they happen, not the severity of the injury. And so, I don't view Devin Brown, if he wins the job, as a guy that you have to worry about getting hurt. He's a big kid. He's thick, big legs. I think it just has been an unfortunate situation for him in those three instances. So I think there's still a battle there. While I do expect Will Howard to win it, I think that's a competition. And, I'm not completely ruling out Julian Sayin, even Lincoln Kienholz to, put themselves in the conversation throughout fall camp. The offensive line, I think most positions are set other than right guard. Ryan Day said when we spoke to him last that Josh Fryer, who can play right tackle, can play right guard, probably will be right tackle. They like the development that they've seen from Josh Fryer this offseason and the way he's changed his body. So if that's the case, then right guard, kind of up in the air between Tegra Shabola, Carson Hinsman, and Luke Montgomery. Carson Hinsman, who was the starting center a year ago, moved to right guard for the spring game, started that game. Tegra Shabola also took first-team reps at right guard in that game. And then Luke Montgomery, I believe, was mostly with the second team when he was on the field. So that'll be an interesting battle to watch. I think on defense, there's not a ton just because there's not a bunch returning, or there's not a bunch of guys that aren't returning. Linebacker, I am still interested to see who is the starting weak side linebacker alongside Cody Simon. Throughout spring, it looked like CJ Hicks was the guy, but you're moving Sonny Styles to a linebacker position. Can he take that next step and kind of supplant CJ Hicks? Do the Buckeyes use more three linebacker sets because they've got those three guys and they like all three of those guys? Arvell Reese and Gabe Powers are also guys to keep in mind, probably more as depth pieces, but guys that could work their way into it. And obviously in the future at linebacker. Other than that, it's not a ton. Tight end, I guess, as well. We don't talk about tight end as much. I mentioned Will Kazmarek earlier, but G. Scott Jr., Jelani Thurman, certainly the freakishly athletic. He'll now be a sophomore player who, if he can get the blocking side of the game down, could be a real weapon for Ohio State. Bennett Christian, a player they like, who got suspended for all of last season after taking a supplement that flagged the NCAA. So some options there. G. Scott seems to be the guy coming out of spring, having been in the program the longest and converted from wide receiver to tight end now in his fourth year. So I think that's probably the way the Buckeyes go, but I do think there is a competition there. Other than that, I think you pretty much could name the guys that are going to play just based on what we've seen in the past.
This may seem a little ridiculous, but wide receiver after Emeka Ibuka isn't proven. The talent is ridiculous. Carnell Tate got his feet wet, did rather well, 18 catches off the top of my head. So he was in meaningful games against decent opponents. So he did something, but there is, you got to think somebody's going to step up, and we think we know who that guy is, if not others. But it's unproven.
Yeah, but we've seen this before, right? I mean, you had a few years ago, you had Emeka Ibuka returning as the main guy, and then Garrett Wilson had done some stuff the year before towards the end of his freshman season. Obviously turns out to be Garrett Wilson. Jackson Smith and Jigba, kind of same thing, works his way in there. Even when you had Marvin Harrison Jr. and Emeka Egbuka kind of take over in the Rose Bowl, along with Jackson Smith and Jigba when Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave sat out. Those guys weren't proven too much, but you felt confident in them going into the season. I think it's kind of the same thing. You have Emeka back, Carnell Tate, as you mentioned. Jeremiah Smith, I think, is who you were alluding to there as the talent, the freakish freshman who will certainly play, I think, a sizable role for Ohio State this year. Brandon Inniss, Bryson Rogers, both sophomores who are going to look for more time. You've got some guys that have kind of been overlooked that are now in their third or fourth year. Jaden Ballard, sort of a Devin Smith deep threat type of player that could work his way in. Kojo Antwi is still on the roster. So there are guys, certainly talent, as you said, Mark, in that room. Not a ton of snaps behind Emeka Egbuka, but I think Brian Hartline may be able to do something he hasn't really done since the Paris Campbell, Terry McLaurin, Johnny Dixon, KJ Hill group, where he can rotate a bit more. And there will be guys who can come in off the bench and keep the level at where the Buckeyes want it. So you don't have to rely on the same three wide receivers throughout most of the season. And we know that that's an important thing for this group because Ryan Day, I don't think, has had a press conference since the end of last year where he hasn't talked about needing to play depth, wanting to have a long season, all those type of things. And that will apply at wide receiver as well. We've seen the last couple of years, guys get injured at that spot, be it Marvin Harrison, who played through it with his ankle that he suffered at Notre Dame, or Jackson Smith and Jigba with the hamstring. So I think having depth that may not have the experience that you'd like, but the talent certainly that Brian Hartline likes will make things easy in that department.
Pat Murphy, Bucknuts 247 Sports, breaking down Ohio State football with us. Please join Pat there on Bucknuts. Is there anything in particular that you've got on the site or upcoming that people should be looking out for?
Well, there's been plenty of recruiting stuff. I have helped Bill Kurlick. Steve Hellwagon's helped out as well. So if you want to catch up, the Buckeyes have had official visits on the weekends, camp during the week. So lots of prospects on campus. If you want to catch up on that, there's a lot of stuff over on Bucknuts. We've talked to a lot of talented players over the last couple of weeks. Another big weekend of official visits upcoming. And that's been a lot of June thus far. As we get into July, we'll get more into team coverage stuff. But June is certainly a recruiting month these days.